All right, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to add dimensions, how to add text, and how to add graphic scales to your drawings in Rhino when you're setting up drawings on layouts or on paper space or on sheets, whatever you want to call it. So in my previous video, when I showed setting up a layout, I scaled everything. And again, you can just check what that scale is, make sure it's not changed by selecting the detail window itself. And going to properties, you can see that's 1 to 4. In other words, 1 inch equals, quarter of an inch equals a foot. So I want to write that, of course, on my drawing. And the way to do that is to write it on the layout itself. Like I've mentioned, if you wanted to use the same drawing multiple times, you would want to, but you wouldn't want to have any information in there that's going to change if you're going to have it on multiple sheets. So what I mean by that is simply when I write my scale, I do it on my layout. When I write a graphic scale, when I put a north arrow, when I put a title block, construction lines, section markers, all that stuff is going to go on my layout itself. Now I have a layer here called dim, which is shorthand for dimension, and I like to just use that layer as my layer for adding text and type and scales and stuff like that on the layout itself. So I'm going to set that as my current. The best tool for adding text in Rhino is just text. There's also one called text object. I do not recommend that. Don't use that. So text, you'll get all these options here. First things first, I'll just type in what I actually want it to say. Scale is 1/4 of an inch equals 1 foot 0 inches. And if you really want to, you can select your fractions and you can click that little fraction bracket. What that'll do is it'll make it, let me just show you. Yeah, it'll make it read as a fraction. So you can see the 1/4 there. Now, obviously that's massive and I don't want it to be that massive. So once you've drawn text, don't worry, you can always change it. So select it over in the properties panel. You can see I have all the same options when I first created it. You can also double click on it and get that same window back. And the way to change this is to change the height. So under height, I'll just type in like 0.25, equivalent of 1/4 of an inch. And that's how large it'll be on my page. What should I say about that? So that's how you add labels. I would also recommend, of course, adding a label that denotes the actual drawing, a plan, obviously. And you can also draw lines, of course. So like familiar, you can draw like a line there that also has a little circle with a number representing the drawing number if you want to. The other thing I would really recommend, because we live in a digital age where drawings get put online all the time, and while I wrote 1/4 of an inch equals a foot on there, if somebody were to find this drawing online and say download it and try and reference it, they might not have any idea how large the sheet was, which means they have no idea whether it's 1/4 of an inch on a 24 by 36 to a foot or 1/4 of an inch on an 11 by 17 to a foot, etc. So it's a really good idea to just add graphic scales. And you're familiar with what that looks like. I'm just going to draw it. So 1/4 of an inch equals a foot. I could draw a rectangle that's 1/4 of an inch long by some dimension, right? Do like that. So that would be a graphic scale representing 0 to 1 foot, right? And again, I'll write text 0 feet. Like so. Again, you'll want to change those values depending on what the scale is, right? So if you have a larger scale, larger drawing, like a detail drawing, you would want to give yourself smaller units, increments to represent on that graphic scale. So I'm going to select this now, and I'm going to, over in my properties, text properties, I'm going to justify it to the top and to the center, because I want that to be more or less centered on that line, right? To relate it to that line. Obviously, once again, it's way too big. I'll change this to 0.0625. Is that too small? A little bit small. Let's try it. There we go. So I can pull that down just a little bit there. And then I can just copy this object. So I'll just type in copy in the command line. I'll snap to the corner there, snap to that corner there. and 1. That's 1 foot. And you can do this in whatever increments you want to. So just remember, you're always counting up from 0. So if I were to put a number there, I would put 2. Let's imagine I want to put 4 now. So I'm going to scale this by double. Sorry, scale 1D by double scale. And if you're ever unsure, just measure it, right? So type in distance. So between the 0 and that line, I have 3/4 of an inch. And that would be the equivalent of 3 inches. 3 feet, sorry, 3 feet. Which is not what I intended. But anyway. So if we wanted it to be 4 inches, I can just select that and move it another, sorry, 4 feet. Keep speaking there. So one more time, distance from the beginning to that line, that's 1 inch. We know there's 4 feet in 1 inch. If I copy my text there, that's going to be a 4. Okay. And then if I wanted to do 8 inches, I could draw a rectangle that equals 4, sorry, 8 feet. I keep saying that wrong. And I can move that over there. So that's going to be 8 feet. I'll just verify distance. Boom. That's 2 inches, which is equivalent to 8 feet. I guess it's a little more common, probably, now that I'm thinking about it, to do this, right? Where you have 2, so like basically double your scale factor. So you have 2, then you have 4, then you have 8. That makes sense. Okay, 8. And then the other thing I would recommend, I think it looks good, is to draw, to hatch that. So you can kind of see it better. You could draw it like that, of course. But if you type in, if you select all those outlines and type in hatch, I drew a line through the center. And now there's an option when you choose hatch, and I think I must already have it selected, so that the reason I don't see just like a solid fill right there, I have this option boundary selected. So if you see this window pop up, just check boundary. And then it'll allow you to click inside the ones that you want to actually fill, and not all of them. Go. There's a graphic scale for you, and if you really want to, so you can obviously just copy. The best way to copy things like that between layouts is to just type in copy to clipboard. So don't use just the copy command. There's some issues with that when you're working in layouts. Copy to clipboard, move over to your other layout, and then hit paste or Control V. You could do the same with your title there. I'm also going to draw a little north arrow. Let's see. Now, one thing I didn't mention, and then you would want to add an N on that. 25 as well. Yeah, I could make my line a little thicker there. Now I should point out this is not in fact north. So one thing you'll probably come across is, you see on my site plan over here, this one is actually tilted. And I've just drawn it this way because it's a lot easier in Rhino to just draw it this way, right? It's a pretty common way to do it. So all I need to do is to figure out what my north is. So I could take like a vertical line over here. Well, actually all I need to do is measure the difference between the angle of this in plan and the angle of it oriented to like kind of straight. So all I need to do for that is to type in angle in the command line. I believe this edge is sort of vertical here, so that's the first line, second. So 37.52. And that's going in the opposite direction. So I would just take that one line, rotate, snap to the center there. I don't want to copy it. And then 37.52 to the left, right? Because if I rotated this whole plan, and this is not really much of a plan, but so again, I'll copy these to my copy to clipboard, my other layout, paste them. So if I were to rotate this whole plan so that that line is straight up and down on the page, I'd be rotating it clockwise, right? And that should get me lined up to what it is in the site plan. Okay. Now, what else? So one other thing to note is hatches. And I think I'll actually cover that in a separate video. I covered, oh yeah, one last thing, sorry. Yeah. Dimensions. So if I wanted to add dimensions to this, and I don't know if you're looking to do that or not, but there's a couple of different dimension commands, as I've mentioned in the past. If you wanted to have the same drawing on multiple sheets, let's say you wanted to keep them separate. So I'm going to also, by the way, here's a little shorthand for you. If you right-click on a layout, move or copy, so you can rearrange them this way as well. I didn't talk about that. But I can also click create a copy here. Also click move to end. It'll just rename it as copy. I'll change that to page 3. And then in here, I can move around and reposition on a different drawing. And I've already retained all my, my information there. This is a section, so I'd want to delete that. Of course, I would want to label it as section AA or whatever it is, and label where that section cut line goes on my plan. But in any case, if I wanted to add dimensions to a drawing, the best way to do that is to do it on your layouts. Just like with other drawing types, if you add dimensions in model space, they'll show up in every drawing. Maybe you want that, maybe you don't. But it'll also mess up the scale of things. So Rhino is actually smart enough to know, like, if this viewport is in 1/8 of an inch equals a foot, which it is, then I can, when I draw a dimension, I'll type in dim is the shorthand for dimension. Let's say I just measure like wall to wall. What's that building? It's actually smart enough to know that that's 108 feet because my layout is scaled. You do have to snap to the points that are in the drawing in model space in order for it to do that. So if I drew construction lines based on those walls and then dimension that, it's going to tell me what that is in model space, in the layout, not in the model space. So just be mindful of that. Make sure you snap to the lines in your drawing. When you dimension things, you also probably notice that dimension looks horrendous. So there's a really quick way to do kind of more professional architectural style dimensions. When I type in dimension before I click anything, I'll click on Annotation Style. And from the drop-down, you should have this loaded by default, foot, inch, architectural, and I'll click OK. If you don't have it loaded, go to Options, go to Annotation Styles. So if you don't see it there, you can click Import in this menu. Sorry, New, I guess. Click New, not Import. And then there's a bunch of default ones here. So foot, inch, architectural is in there somewhere, foot, inch, architectural. And you can load that. Now, that actually looks pretty good, right? So I don't really need to change that, but let's assume it doesn't look good. Or let's assume you did do a bunch of dimensions in your model space. It's also fine. So by the way, the dimension command will just snap automatically to ortho. So if I like click on, say, that corner and like that corner there, it's going to snap only to straight up and down or straight left and right. You can see my dimension is massive in here. If I go back to the page that has that drawing on it, I moved it out too far. Move it back a little bit there. You can see it looks totally normal on that page, right? And it's super annoying in my model space. So there's something, just like with our line types, there's a way to scale that. And if I select on that layout, select on that dimension and go to properties, you'll see under model space scale, there's a number set there by default. It's 96, which is very big. Change it to like 12, oops, 12. That's a little bit better, still bigger than what I see on my layout, right? So maybe like 4. That's about, it should be almost, that should be exactly the same as what I see in my layout. Okay. So that's how to not drive yourself nuts with dimensions. The same is true, by the way, of text. So if I wrote some text over here and I said, plan right here, obviously, like I said in the previous video, I really recommend you don't put text in your model space, put it on your layout. Not even showing up. there. And it's totally normal size in my layout, right? So same thing applies. There's a scale factor. And actually, it's using the same scale factor. You can see when I select that text, it's using that annotation style that I've just used for my dimension. So same thing applies. I would just change that model space scale to like 4. That looks exactly like what it'll look like on my drawing. Like I said, don't do it that way, but if you need to, that's how you set up those scaling changes between model space and layout. Last thing I'll mention, so I can do this for each dimension I add. If I were to go and, so every time I draw a new dimension, it doesn't have to reset that model space scale factor. To do it for all of the dimensions in that dimension style, or annotation style, I should say, I can go to Options, go to Annotation Styles, and expand it, or you can select on it and click Edit. And then I can say model space, I can adjust this for the whole style. And so now every time I adjust a dimension, it will make a new dimension, it'll automatically have that model space scale to it. And so there you go. Like I said, I really recommend you do it in layouts anyway, but just so you understand how that stuff works. Last couple things I'll mention with the dimensions. So dimension, obviously, like I said, will only do things where it's like straight up and down or right and left, like that, or like that. If I wanted to dimension something at an angle, there's dim aligned. I just type in dim aligned, and I could like measure that stair oriented to that angle of the stair. And I can also dimension radii. I can dimension, so if you type in dim, let it autofill, you can see all the things that are possible to dimension. Yeah, so, and just remember, these all have that annotation style applied if I change anything globally. So if I decide, oh, all my dimensions are too big, I can just edit the style, right? So type in Options, Annotation Styles, go to the one you want, and down in here, there's all these different settings. Let's see, which one's the one? Font. So if I wanted to change the size of them overall, I wanted to make them all half as large, and you get a little preview up there of what that's going to look like, right? So 2.5. Did that work? 0.65. So that's changing how far that is from changing how far that is. No, I think it is changing the size. Sorry, driving myself crazy here. Anyway, yeah. So you can globally edit the style like that. 0.25. Yeah, so that made all my numbers twice as big. And there's a whole lot of settings you can change there. Anyway, all right. So that should wrap up this video. This should also cover, like, if you wanted to create a title block that had a bunch of the key information about your drawing, you could do that in here. So you could draw like some rectangles, put some boxes with labels for various different, bits of information related to your drawing. And then when I go to print, it'll all be in there. All right.